Hello everyone and welcome back to Ruby Lessons on Codecademy. So in the last lesson we looked at the Duckifier, yeah I can pronounce it. So that it was a project in which we used control flow to make a project program which changes all s's in a string to th. If you missed it, please check it out and learn something from it hopefully. We did learn 2 new methods, so that's worthwhile I think. So today we're going to be looking at something slightly different because it's not really to do much with control flow, it's to do with iterating or looping over. So let's see. We're going to start off by looking at the while loop. So sometimes you want to repeat an action in Ruby while a certain condition is true, but you don't know how many times you'll have to repeat that action. So okay, let's back up a bit. And how would in programming, how would you write a program that prints out all of the numbers between 1 and 1000? You wouldn't literally just go and write print 1, print 2, print 3, because that's a really stupid way of doing it. You will need 1000 lines to do it. That's where loops come in. You can use them to print numbers from, you can do repetitive things much more easily and in much less space. So a good example would be prompting a user. In this case, for the example it's talking about, a good example would be prompting a user for a certain type of input. If they insist on giving you the wrong thing, so if you're asking for a string and they're giving you a number, then you may have to re-ask them several times before you get the kind of input you're looking for. But you want to do it until they give you the correct input, not until your program runs out of lines. So to accomplish this, we use something called a while loop. It checks to see if a certain condition is true, and while it is, the loop keeps running. As soon as the condition stops being true, the loop stops as well. So once the user has entered the correct input, you can exit the loop, but until they enter the correct input, you can still be in the loop. You can use booleans to change which way you want it to be. So check out the code in the editor. Can you guess what it'll do? When you think you know, click submit code to see the results. So we have counter 1, okay. While counter is less than 11, so it's not less than or equal to, so it's going to be, if it's numbers it's going to be 10, or if it's integers rather. So puts counter. Counter equals counter plus 1, or counter plus equals 1 is the same thing I believe. So this is going to print all of the numbers between 1 and 10. And it's all going to be done in 5 lines instead of 10 lines. Okay, let's go through it slowly. So counter is 1. You're checking the condition. Is counter less than 11? Yes it is. So it puts counter, and that's going to put 1 to the console, so we get 1 displayed. Counter is increased by 1. Counter equals counter plus 1, so counter is 2 at the end of this. Then we go back to the starting line, which is while counter is less than 11. So it is 2, so because counter is equal to 2, is 2 less than 11? Yes it is. So puts counter, puts 2, and counter is increased by 1 again, so it's 3. Okay, skipping forward, we get to 10. Is 10 less than 11? Yes it is, so you get puts counter, puts 10 out on the console, and it gets increased by 1, so it gets to 11. Now when we check for this again, is 11 less than 11? No it's not. So it skips all of this and goes to end. And that's how the loop ends, in this case anyway. And as you can see, my prediction was correct, it counted from 1 to 10. Ignore the nil. Danger, infinite loops. So you really don't want to run into infinite loops. So the loop printed out the numbers 1 to 10 and then stopped. Notice that it stopped. It didn't continue running or anything. This was because the loop's condition said to continue while the counter was less than 11. Since counter went up by 1 each time through the loop stopped when counter hit 11. What if we'd forgotten to increment the counter? It would have stayed at 1. The loop would have kept checking to see if it was less than 11, and 1 is always less than 11. And the loop would never have ended. This is called an infinite loop. So an infinite loop is a loop that never ends unless you force end it. but it's still an infinite loop. And it will cause your program to crash. Avoid them at all costs. So it can cause your program to crash because it's going to take up too much memory, or it could take up too much memory of your computer. Sometimes a good IDE is going to spot them and stop them after a few iterations. I know that Python does that, which is quite good actually. But in other cases, because there are so many iterations, it stops it, but it's not an infinite loop. So the while loop in the editor is currently an infinite loop. Correct it so it will be. So be careful, if you click save submit code right away, you'll start the infinite loop and you'll have to refresh the page. So we want to increment I by 1. So I plus equals 1 is the same as saying I equals I plus 1. Good, so we printed all of the numbers from 0 to 4, which is what we were expecting, seeing as this was less than 5 and not less than or equal to. Good. Now we learned about infinite loops. So infinite loops are usually quite easy to spot because your program either won't print anything or will print a repeated value over and over. In Codecademy they're quite annoying because you have to refresh the page, but otherwise they aren't that big of a deal because your computer has quite a lot of memory before the ones get to it and crash your program. Moving on. The until loop. So the complement to the while loop is the until loop. It's sort of like a backwards while. So it's kind of like a while not condition is met. So you will see what I mean. So you have if and unless, and this is like while and until. That's like the comparison. So in the example above, we first create a variable I and set it to 0. Good. Then we execute a block of code until I is equal to 6. Okay. That block of code increments I. So when I is equal to 6, the block ends. So when I is equal to 6, because it's until then, it ends. Finally, we print 6, the value of I, to the console. Again, because it's looping, you can still have an infinite loop, because until is again a loop. Instructions on line 2, so that's here. Fill in the blank so that the loop breaks when counter is greater than 10. So greater than 10. And submit code. And I just made an infinite loop. Okay, let's reload the page, and I know why I did it. I didn't realize step 2 of the instructions. Okay, counter plus equals 1. And we want a greater than symbol there. Save and submit code, and good, we get 1 to 10 instead of infinite ones. So it's not that dangerous, as you saw, to have an infinite loop. What else did I want to say? I can't remember right now. So yeah, moving on. More assignment operators. So we've been using syntax like counter equals counter plus 1, which works, but as you'll increasingly find with Ruby, there's always another way. And I kind of mentioned it, I didn't realize they were going to have it. So a shortcut is to use an assignment operator. You already know one assignment operator, the equal to sign, the single equal to sign, which sets a variable. You can update a variable with additional assignment operators, however, which include plus equal to, minus equal to, times equal to, and divide equal to. So they all work in a similar way. So for instance, when you type counter plus equals 1, you're telling Ruby add 1 to counter, then assign that new value back to counter. So it's the same as doing counter equals counter plus 1. Counter times equals is the same as doing counter times counter equals counter times whatever. So this provides a succinct way of updating variable values in our program. Some languages have the increment operators plus plus and minus minus, which are actually quite nice. I know C++ has them, and I really like that. Which also add or subtract just 1 from a value. So if it's plus plus, it adds 1. If it's minus minus, it subtracts 1 from a value. But Ruby doesn't have those. You'll have to make do with plus equals and minus equals. These two are also quite good. The loop from the first exercise is in the editor. Rewrite it using the appropriate assignment operators. Oh, actually, did that before. They didn't copy and paste it. I mean, they didn't let me have my old code, but oh well. That's fine. Okay, so that's the lesson for today. Loops are actually quite a big part of programming, because you don't want to be repeating yourself over and over again in programming, as we've seen before. So if you have any questions, please ask in the comments down below. I will answer them as soon as possible. Other than that, if you enjoyed watching this video, if you learned something new, please like, share and subscribe. It helps me out and encourages me to make more videos for you guys and girls. And whatever. Sorry, I'm trying not to be discriminative, but it's not working out very well. But yeah, until next time, thank you so much for watching and goodbye.